Hey guys, it's finally time for part 2 of the Godzilla fight record series. I've already gone over the Showa era, so check out that video if you haven't already. But if you're interested in the Heisei era's Godzilla fighting history, then this is the video for you. The Showa version of Godzilla had the most extensive fight record of any of the iterations of the Big G, but if you're wondering how to follow up such feats, then look no further than the Heisei era, a time and place where Godzilla would take power and size to its extremes. I'm betting that Godzilla will have an even stronger showing here, if only with fewer battles. So let's dive in and see how the wins, losses, and ties stack up for the Godzilla from the second Toho film universe. Before we start, I just want to note that this is a Godzilla vs. other Kaiju fight series, so I won't be counting battles where Godzilla confronts the humans or their weapons except for the large-scale ones like Mecha-G. And that means skipping Super X, as awesome as it is, this is a Kaiju fighting series, so we're going to begin with the second film from the era with Godzilla vs. Biollante. After the return of Godzilla in 1984, or Godzilla 1985 as it's known in the States, the Heisei G would come back to the big screen, this time bringing a brand new Kaiju challenger to the arena, one that would actually be created in part with his own cells. In their first encounter, Biollante would be in her rose or flower beast form, an unassuming yet dangerous stage. Unfortunately for the plant-based Kaiju, Godzilla's atomic breath would be devastating, causing abnormal effects to its cell division. It would fight back with its radioactive acidic sap, which did burn the skin, yet the constant barrage of those breath attacks would eventually set Biollante on fire, breaking her down into spores, starting off the era at 1 win and 0 losses. For the final confrontation between the two, we would see Biollante go from her flower beast form to the impressive plant beast form. The atomic breath attack would still be ultra effective here, yet the much larger form was more aggressive, could move surprisingly fast, and could spit larger quantities of that acid sap from its enormous mouth. Even the tendrils here were strong enough to pierce the flesh of Godzilla and go right through his hand. In the end though, the breath attacks were just too much, especially after Biollante took one point blank inside the mouth and out the back of its head. A fatal blow that would see the energy spores again break up and disperse into the air, giving Godzilla a solid start to his Kaiju fighting history at 2-0. Even though she would go on to gain the acceptance of the Godzilla fanbase, the original low box office numbers for Godzilla vs. Biollante made Toho go back to the classics, bringing back new versions of fan favorites King Ghidorah and Mothra for the next 2 films. Beginning with Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, we would get a rare instance of Godzilla facing off with the 3-headed dragon kaiju on his own, without help. This fight would be epic, with both trading devastating breath attacks and blows that would knock each monster off its feet. King Ghidorah would finally gain the upper hand in the fight, keeping Godzilla pinned to the ground when the humans were able to break the control between Ghidorah and its controllers. This would temporarily stun the 3G, allowing Godzilla to get up, taking the monster by the tails and slamming it to the ground relentlessly. The Dragon Kaiju would recover and grab the Big G in that famous hold, strangling him until he was able to release a nuclear pulse attack that would send Ghidorah to the ground, where he was then able to decapitate the center head with an atomic blast. The beast would try to fly off, taking another hit to the wings, sending it to near death at the bottom of the ocean, giving Godzilla his first solo Ghidorah win, now at 3-0, albeit with human intervention. With Godzilla now rampaging unimpaired, the humans would have no choice but to use the body of King Ghidorah to create Mecha King Ghidorah and use it to try to drive Godzilla away. Once again controlled, this time by Emmy, the humans would use that rebuilt kaiju to try to stop Godzilla from destroying Japan. Unfortunately, the additions to King Ghidorah would not be enough to stop the Big G, only keeping the monster in the fight for a few minutes. With it looking like even Mecha King Ghidorah would fall to the mighty Godzilla, Emmy would hold him and carry him away from the mainland. Ghidorah would fly out over the ocean, where Godzilla would land a point-blank atomic blast, dropping the two down below. Now, to most people, including the information that I can find online, the consensus is that this fight was a tie. I can agree with that somewhat. The two stopped fighting once they dropped into the water, or at least were led to believe so since the film comes to an end. But I can also agree that Godzilla here was unstoppable for the most part, and he was able to easily handle both Ghidorah and Mecha King Ghidorah. I think if the fight was to continue, Godzilla would have done some more head removal work on the big 3G. So I'm comfortable with giving Godzilla the victory here too, but we'll revisit the numbers at the end of the video. But for now, let's just say it's a tie, and Godzilla is at 3 wins and 1 tie. Like I said earlier, Mothra would be next up on the slate for the Heisei Gozilla, although the story would get spiced up a bit with the addition of Batra. Here we would see Godzilla attack the Mothra larva fresh out of its egg in the middle of the ocean, strapped to a boat. Talk about an awkward place for Mothra to enter the battlefield. Even so, the little kaiju would hold its own here, even in water, keeping Godzilla at a distance with its webbing while trying to dodge those atomic breath attacks. Surprisingly, the larva would even come in for melee attacks, though this was not a smart choice with the big G. Joining in on the action, Batra's larval form would toss Mothra aside and do battle with Godzilla on the ocean's floor, only to have both disappear into an exposed vault. You could say that the match was a 3-way tie, but I'd say it was more of a no contest due to interference, with Batra in the case of Mothra, and with the fault in the case of Godzilla against Batra. So I'd say it's more of a wash. But the rematch would give a more defined ending. Now in their imago forms, Batra and Mothra would begin the fight, with Godzilla joining later, likely looking to finish off his earlier fight with Batra. He would eventually knock the dark moth out of the sky, and Mothra would approach it, convincing it to work together in order to defeat the greater threat in Godzilla. Now the Heisei era was known for power scales being taken up a notch. Mothra was no exception here, as this era's iteration was one of the most powerful. We would see her go on the offensive with antenna beams, arc lightning, and scales that could reflect Godzilla's breath back onto it. Batra had perhaps even stronger range attacks, and together, realizing that they could not defeat Godzilla, they attempted to carry him out to sea, a familiar ending to films in the franchise. Before they could drop him, Godzilla was able to mortally wound Batra with a point-blank atomic breath, sending the two into the ocean, with Mothra placing a seal over the water. I always saw this as a seal, but I had the thought that its intention was to lock away both Batra and Godzilla so they couldn't do any more harm, while others say it was a sign of respect towards the sacrifice of Batra. Online you'll find sites that back up both claims, yet none of them have references to Toho sources. Regardless of how the fight ended, I still think you could say easily that Godzilla defeated Batra, but that Mothra survived, possibly ending the encounter with a seal, or at the very least, she flew off with Godzilla not showing up. This leads to another outcome that could be debated, but the way it ended with Godzilla underwater and Mothra putting her seal of approval on the situation, I'd say that the director and writer meant for the final victory to go to Mothra, putting Godzilla now at 4-1-1. Keeping in line with the theme of using monsters from the past, we would see the return of Mechagodzilla, except this time it would be defending Japan instead of attacking it. Before we could see what a man-made Godzilla would look like, however, Godzilla would have to face off with an old friend in Rodan. Drawn in by the egg, the two would come into conflict, where Rodan would put up one heck of a fight before getting blasted into a mountainside, bringing Godzilla to 5-1-1. Now the Heisei G would finally face off with the human-built Mechagodzilla. The Showa's alien-built version gave Godzilla a brutal beating on both occasions, and this second incarnation would possibly be even more powerful. A new defensive coating consisting of synthetic diamonds could absorb Godzilla's atomic breath, changing it to fuel for its devastating plasma grenade attack. When used, the plasma grenade was able to knock Godzilla down, allowing Mecha G to fire off paralyzer missiles to temporarily immobilize him. After learning that Godzilla has a second brain near his tail, Mecha G is able to fire shock anchor harpoons into his flesh in an attempt to damage that second brain. But somehow Godzilla is able to reverse that current and cause it to flow back into Mecha G, short-circuiting the unit, allowing Godzilla to escape. Technically, this is a win for Godzilla, but if it wasn't for this new ability to reverse that electrical charge, he may have died here. Yet I would say it's a common thing for the Big G to invent some new way to win the day, giving him a 6-win, 1 tie, and 1 loss standing. For their rematch in another Showa Mechagodzilla homage, we would see the two engage in a beam lock between the atomic breath and the Mega Buster Ray. Godzilla is knocked down, but Mecha G overheats, allowing Godzilla to unleash a melee barrage on the motionless metal titan. That is until he is distracted by Garuda and it's able to join up with Mecha-G, creating Super Mechagodzilla. With the added power and weaponry, this has to be the most powerful iteration of Mechagodzilla to date on film. Hovering above and unleashing ranged attacks, the fight would begin to go just like their first meeting did initially, with Mecha-G successfully firing into the back of Godzilla, although this time it was able to destroy the second brain before the Big G could counter that electricity. The fight was basically over, and it looked like Godzilla was about to get his second loss when a mortally wounded Rodan, or now improved Fire Rodan, would fall onto the battered Godzilla and in a Mothra-like fashion give its own life force to the Big G, allowing him to survive and become supercharged. Godzilla would then unleash a nuclear pulse that would melt the synthetic armor on Mecha-G, rendering its main defensive capability useless. The following charged up breath attacks would destroy Mechagodzilla, bringing the fight to an abrupt end, racking up another win with our record now at 7-1-1. Having survived the return of Toho icons Mothra, Rodan, King Ghidorah, and even Mechagodzilla, the Heisei G would now face off with yet another doppelganger. Yet this was no mechanical kaiju. Space Godzilla was a monster made from Godzilla's own cells, carried into space either by the spores of Biollante or on the wings of Mothra as she flew out to space to deflect a meteor heading to Earth in 1993. I tend to believe that Space G is from the spores of Biollante, as we can even see the small tusks on the mouth of both kaiju, not to mention the outcome of the second match with Godzilla. When the two would first meet up, Space Godzilla would attack both Godzilla Jr. and the big guy himself, reflecting atomic breath attacks while unleashing airborne energy blasts that would drop Godzilla, giving Space G the moments needed to imprison Jr. After which Space Godzilla would fly off, causing many to say that this fight was a draw. Although it was clear that Space Godzilla had the upper hand in the fight, but with him choosing to leave, I can see the draw or no contest ruling. But I can also see that Space Godzilla accomplished what it needed by capturing Jr. and putting Godzilla down so that it could leave to build its crystal tower formations. I tend to agree with the latter and give Godzilla a loss here, putting him at 7 wins, 1 tie, and 2 losses. But again, we're going to revisit these numbers at the end of the video to take everything into account. For the rematch though, Mothra would enter the fray, yet it would be knocked out of commission before Godzilla could show up. Once on the scene, the evil doppelganger again is able to deflect those atomic blasts and use its range attacks on the Big G. With its telekinesis, it tosses Godzilla around like a ragdoll. Luckily, Mothra would be operational once more, allowing the pilots to split the mech and go underground to help destroy that tower, giving strength to Space G. Mothra would then take out the shoulder crystals of Space Godzilla before getting taken out for good. Space G had been siphoning off Godzilla's energy throughout the battle, and the humans realized that this was a tactic of Godzilla, hoping to overload his enemy. However, just before reaching the point of no return, Godzilla would charge up a spiral beam attack, blowing up Space G in the same way he did with Mecha-G. And here, we would see an energy spore dispersion at the time of death, bringing Godzilla to 8 wins, 1 tie, and 2 losses. For the last film entry into this era, we would see Godzilla face off with Ghidorah, a kaiju created from the very weapon that was used to destroy the original Showa era Godzilla. The first matchup would actually be between Godzilla Jr. and Ghidorah, but for the film's climax, we would see a battle like none ever seen before. With Godzilla on death's door due to his burning status, he would have to spend his last moments on Earth fighting perhaps his deadliest enemy yet, one that killed his son right in front of him. With everything stacked against him, Godzilla was able to stay in the fight due to his overwhelming regenerative and atomic abilities provided to him with the extra nuclear energy. The two would trade blows until the humans were able to strike the airborne Ghidorah with their ULT or ultra low temperature weapons, and it was this, along with the conflicting enormously high temperatures from Godzilla himself, that would eventually lead to the demise of Ghidorah, leaving our Heisei Godzilla with a final record before its death of 9 wins, 1 tie, and 2 losses, a record that would only be rivaled by his Showa era cousin. So where can the numbers vary depending on how you saw the fights? Well, it all depends. Was the first fight between Godzilla and Mecha King Ghidorah that ended up in the water a tie, or do you give the win to Godzilla? Is that first fight with Mothra and Batra a no contest or a tie? Do you see the first Space Godzilla fight as a victory for Space Godzilla, or yet another tie or even a no contest? Either way, Godzilla was clearly the alpha of the era. Let's not forget the assistance he got either. The humans knocked out control of King Ghidorah, and the fight momentum immediately went from Ghidorah to Godzilla. Even Mothra eventually had the teamwork of Batra, and the humans' use of the ULT weapons was critical in bringing Destoroyah down. And this is why Godzilla, even in an era where he has a slightly evil edge to him, at least when compared to the Showa and Legendary eras, is still smart enough to know when to take a helping hand. Unfortunately, the Heisei G would die at the end of the era, much like the first Showa Godzilla, but its life force would flow into Godzilla Jr., making him that era's new Godzilla, a storyline that unfortunately was never continued. And that's it for me guys on the Heisei era. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I can't wait to look at the Millennium, Reiwa, and Hollywood eras down the line. Thanks again. I'd love to hear any thoughts and questions you had on this one, and as always, your likes, comments, shares, and subscriptions go a long way towards helping the channel grow. Thanks again guys, and I hope to see you next time.